Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining this TDL webinar on major trends in cybersecurity in 2025. We've got an excellent panel to discuss the subject, which is very broad-ranging. We've got 60 minutes, which surely will not be enough, but we'll have a go. And moderating us today will be Claire Vishik, TDL Strategic Advisor. And I hand over to Claire to introduce the panel and take us from there. To you, Claire.
Thank you very much for hosting us, and thank you for this discussion taking place at the end of the year, where we have a lot to discuss. I am glad and delighted to welcome our outstanding panelists. Today we have Scott Algeier, President and CEO of Conrad, Cybersecurity Consulting. We have Matthew Rosenquist, who is the founder of Cybersecurity Insights, very appropriately, and CISO of Mercury Risk. And finally, we have Iva Tasheva, who is the co-founder and cybersecurity lead at CYEN. I am sure everyone has heard a lot about cybersecurity and how the situation with the advent of artificial intelligence attack, with additional computing power, with various tools to create new attacks, and even attack as a service or ransomware as a service capabilities today, how it has become a significant issue in how our digital society operates, with significant effects and impacts on the society at large. We have a lot of new things that have happened or have escalated in 2025, and many of them will continue in 2026. And I am sure we'll hear about new trends as well. We have AI augmented attacks, including phishing, that's very sophisticated and widespread, and social engineering. The new area, or somewhat new, are agentic attacks and polymorphic malware, quite difficult to detect. Ransomware is still going strong. Supply chain exploitation, you, I am sure, have read about it. There are cyber physical attacks. Insider and credential attacks continue to go strong. There are sort of pre-quantum attacks where encrypted information is collected in hopes to decrypt it later, and so on and so forth. But there were a lot of positive developments also with regard to the defense technologies. But rather than talking about it, I will turn it over to our distinguished panelists to provide their original view, their initial view on what they think was the most important in 2025, what the trends may be for 2026, and other relevant areas that they want to cover. With that, Scott, would you please start?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and the team today. So 2025, it's been quite a year, and I think there's obviously some of the advances and the rapid advances that AI, both on the attack side and the defense side, is the key story of 2025. I think a second element that is, from a high level perspective, is the challenge of resource allocation, right? There's security budgets aren't what they used to be. There's a lot of economic challenges. The AI is kind of upending some of the spending model for enterprises. So there's also an increasing amount of regulations. The allocating the scarce security resources that we have to maximum impact, I think, is a challenge that we have in 2025, and that will carry over into 2026 as well. And then, at least here in the United States, there's been a pretty significant disruption in some of the federal government apparatus around cybersecurity. And this includes a government shutdown that forced furloughs for a significant portion of the federal government, including cybersecurity staff. There have been cuts in the CISO's budget and CISO's team, and we also had to deal with a suspension in the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015, which is the legal framework that enables sharing of threat intelligence within industry and between industry and government. That is back thanks to the continuing resolution that opened up the government, but it's only back until January. So we have the possibility of facing that again next year. So from a quick high level perspective, I think those are some of the three trends that I saw in 2025 that were kind of high level drivers for a lot of what we've been focusing on.
Thank you very much. You mentioned something that's really important for cybersecurity defenses, information sharing. Do you think the advent of AI tools that depend on a large amount of data will be helpful to support some level of information sharing without a formal framework, or do you think it will have very limited effect?
I think AI definitely will help in threat intelligence sharing because it can help us more quickly identify threat intelligence, right? They can help more quickly go through data and identify what's important. But we still, I think, need the legal frameworks to actually share that threat intelligence once we identify what those key indicators are, what those key trends are within the attackers. So yes, I mean AI will definitely help us identify the key elements from noise, right? It has the ability to go through a lot more information a lot more quickly and identify help us identify the bad guys. But once we do that, we still need a legal structure to share that information. Within some of the communities I support, the ISAC communities, they do have non-disclosure agreements that enable sharing within the membership, but often getting this information from industry into government becomes difficult because a part of the legal framework in the United States that the CISA Act provides is protections against public disclosures of the threat intelligence that is shared with government. So maintaining those protections that industry can share this threat intelligence without it becoming public is really an important aspect of that legislation.
Thank you. There is always a sort of trifecta of technology, geopolitical situation, legislation, and regulations that rule this field. Thank you very much for providing these insights. Matt, what do you think about the situation today and in the future? What are your views?
Well, there's a tremendous amount to talk about. I think, when we look at either retrospects of a previous year or we look at the predictions for the next year, it helps if we kind of break it out into a structure, right? If we look at the threat actors and changes there, the targets, the impacts, the technologies and tools, the methods and tactics, and the culture and industry. And there's changes in each one of those. So the highlights really, when we look at the threat actors, we saw nation states and cyber criminals rise and become still the most prominent movers and shakers in the industry. To a lesser extent in 2025, vulnerability researchers, both black hat and white hat, as well as data harvesters, were also pretty impactful to the industry. When it comes to targets and impacts, critical infrastructure, we knew that was going to happen. Supply chain attacks, yes, that happened across devices, software, and services. And also the healthcare and finance, including cryptocurrency, were all targeted more than the previous years, and that's probably going to move into the next year. From a technology perspective, 2025, zero trust adoption, the buzzword of the year. We also saw a major push for MFA, which is great. That really helps defenses. And then the big wild card, right? Artificial intelligence adoption. And that hits both the attackers were using it, the adopters were starting to bring it in, which increases their vulnerability surface area. And then the defenders are also the laggers here, but also starting to adopt AI. And it's just the beginning, right? 2026, we're going to go fast with that. From a methods and tactics, you covered some of them. Digital extortion, including ransomware, data breaches, and exfiltration was also big in 2025. Tech vulnerability discovery and exploitation actually spiked. We saw that in many metrics increase above social engineering, like phishing and things of that sort. So that kind of plays a role in the hardware, firmware, operating systems, application, and services targets. And then when we get to the culture and the industry, right, there's a rising expectations we saw in 2025 will continue into 2026 across users, partners, regulators, auditors, investors, C-suite, and ultimately into the board. And that drove changes where the CISO is now being forced into a transformation from a technical expert to a business risk expert. And we're seeing greater impacts because of all these different things that we've already talked about. And, again, we see AI, we see quantum, PQC, and a privacy normalization in 2025, which was great to see, and it'll probably continue into 2026. So there are topics in each one of these that we can dive into. But from a structure, it's easy to look at it from kind of this perspective.
Thank you for providing this extensive perspective of what's going on. You said at the beginning that there is an expansion of different threat agents, including nation states, and of course, the usual attackers plus insiders. Is there any trend aided by the new technology in 2025 that led to the growth of one of those categories of the threat agents, or is it the same trend as last year?
Well, the trends continue. AI is simply a tool, so it can accelerate, it can increase the capabilities and the efficiency and the effectiveness. The early adopters for disruptive technology such as AI typically are cyber criminals. They don't have to go through any quality assurance testing or anything like that. They can just go fast. And there tends to be a window of opportunity where they leverage that technology. Even by, we're in November now, we're seeing many reports that are showing AI is assisting attacks by cyber criminals upwards of 70%. So AI is involved to help them either scale or increase their effectiveness by 70% in 70% of the cases. So it's just the beginning, it's not the ending, but they are very quick to adopt, leverage, and benefit from disruptive technology like AI, and we are seeing that with cyber criminals. So we're going to see a bubble here before the defenders can actually use similar technologies to counter what the cyber criminals can do.
Thank you. So it's still the cyber criminals that power up the trend towards the use of new technology in the attacks.
First
Thank
mover
you, Matt.
advantage. Yep.
Yeah. Yes, first mover advantage. Exactly. Iva, what is your view? What is the view from Europe?
Indeed, so I recognize everything already heard from the previous speakers, and I'm very fortunate to be the last one to speak, so I don't need to present all this massive knowledge base. But what I can maybe focus on is how I see it as the mass evolution. So what I see really changing is that we have a big spaghetti bowl, if you wish. We always knew cybersecurity is a combination of business, of technology, of people, but also politics. And I have not until now seen such a very mixed up of all these ingredients in one place, and it's hot. It's really hot. We see politics in terms of national decisions. In Europe, we discuss things around encryption. Okay, how can we ensure that law enforcement can continue to perform their work while we have still strong security? But we also see in Europe specifically how we are targeted, really due to geopolitical conflict. And it seems TechCrunch at least wrote, and I can tell you it feels like that we are definitely not the safest place on earth, and we didn't used to be. We used to be very safe place in terms of security, in terms of cybersecurity as well, and now we are definitely lagging behind because we are very well under attack and very well a little confused of where to start. Do we go in this AI wave and invest in optimizing our processes and businesses? Do we fight for survival? Economic, geopolitical tensions are not making it easy. Or do we also invest in the security measures, knowing also we have tons of European regulations coming in place now? So the NIS2, which you might know about, was the first major cybersecurity regulation in Europe that is now revamped with way broader scope than before. Basically, hundreds of thousands of new companies fall within the scope, with very stringent requirements in terms of organization security measures such as risk management accountability, supply chain. And this supply chain issue that we discussed in terms of attack now is biting, because it's not only a risk, but it's also a requirement. And we are trying to figure out a way how we can manage this in an efficient but also effective way. So at the end of the day, we don't get lost in all the supply chain, but we keep our focus on the risk. It is also important to notice that we have other regulations on financial sector, which are becoming de facto kind of a standard for all suppliers as well, like DORA, also very stringent, very, very detailed regulations. And we have the upcoming Cyber Resilience Act, which would regulate all products sold on the EU market that are products, I say in the large sense. They define it in Europe as product with digital elements, meaning everything, software or hardware that is processing some sort of data. All these things sold on the EU market, again, another set of strict requirements for the product security, tons of new standards we are defining to implement these regulations. But it also comes with an improvement in the sense that we would have more information. So all these regulations we speak about, they also have incident notification requirement. So in the future, we would be able to have actually a better understanding. So we don't need to come here as experts and share from our experience. We would have the data behind who was attacked, what happened, what were the measures implemented or the gaps, and then have better targeted budgets, but also maybe policy making. And something from yesterday in Europe as well, we have this so-called omnibus regulation, which is aimed at streamlining, simplifying the rules. Mostly I'm following obviously the digital rules, the cybersecurity rules, but it's all kind of rules are impacted. And for cybersecurity, something that is proposed also is to have one place for incident notification for all regulations. You think GDPR needs to Cyber Resilience Act. Hopefully this would also make it a little easier on companies, so they don't have to jump in different agencies and templates and information gathering. So at the end, really, we could have better informed choices and decisions when it comes to cybersecurity. And last but not least, another positive thing I see is the realization of the business impact of cybersecurity. You know, we had the recent attacks in the UK that showed us that attacking one major manufacturer, car manufacturer, doesn't only bring the losses, and probably the biggest loss in the UK cyber history of 1.3 billion, if I'm not wrong, but don't quote me on that. What was the focus at the moment was, we are fine as a company, but help our supply chain, because we are closed for weeks and weeks, and there are suppliers that produce one, let's say, element, one component might be a rear mirror for the car. And we are their only client, right? So those suppliers for weeks and months might not have any sales. So you see how this supply chain is not only about security, but it's also the impact of attacks, how they can flow down the losses. So this is what I see as like the major trends, especially coming from Europe, where I think the focus is very much also on the regulation and on defense. We're kind of in a very transition moment of adapting to the new realities.
Thank you very much, Iva. It's amazing how a simple element in the supply chain or in a significant software package, I remember attacks where an essential component was removed from an open source distribution and then nothing worked anywhere. Sometimes it's not even meant as an attack, but it has this effect with regard to the process. So as a transition to our next question, Europe has always been in the forefront of the regulatory development, sort of a pioneer in creating new approaches to regulation, sometimes extraterritorial. How do you think we should map this regulatory development to the very quick cycles in technology evolution so that difficulties are not created as the technology changes, but the directive was created for the prior generation of technology to cover it?
So it was always the objective for technology to be for regulation to be technology neutral. So in theory, it should be based on the objectives that are valid independently of what type of technology is regulated. This you have seen in NIS2, for instance. It didn't change much in terms of requirements. The requirements are not really a bottleneck. It's just the scale of implementation that becomes very difficult. What is maybe important also to understand is that we have this so-called new legislative framework in Europe, which is the regulation aims at saying what should be done. So what is again the objective? This is the CRA falls directly within this framework, and then there would be standards, more specific standards that are industry driven and that are certifications or audits that would more focus on how this is performed without being descriptive in the regulation. So in that sense, I don't see a problem immediate when it comes to the cybersecurity regulations. What I see though is different parts of Europe have different objectives, and then sometimes those might clash. So this is sometimes more interesting to observe. How do we make sure that when we move one regulation in one corporate social responsibility, for instance, direction, that it doesn't go against the objective of security? And this is something we have been seeing over the years and calling from industry to the Commission specifically to implement, and we see now different formats of working groups, consultations to make sure that this is not happening. So to your answer, I don't see in a way any technology specific regulation. We always speak about state-of-art objectives defined as the core principles of security, but how you do it, which technology you use to do it, normally should not be a problem. I have seen, for instance, the AI also regulation, which is also includes security requirements, but for high risk systems. So those are because it's technology regulation, and now there is a little bit of a backstep from the Commission also saying, wait, maybe we delay it. We see first what happens. It's in the middle of development, this technology, and then we can pick it up from there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. Obviously, the technology neutral regulations are stronger than technology specific, but then technology neutral regulations are implemented through, for instance, certifications that are technology specific. So industry typically feels the pinch in this practical implementation, right? Rather than the interpretation of the general regulation, as well as different approaches in different European countries. We'll have a chance to discuss it further today. With regard to technology, Scott, what do you think has changed in terms of the new threats and how they are addressed in the new or relatively new technology environment in 2025? Obviously, we don't have radically new technology, but we have additional ease in creating attacks that are very easy to detect. We have significant developments in how easy it is to carry out, cyber physical attacks and things of this nature. What are your views on this? What is the main issue in the technology space or issues that have become prominent in 2025?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So you're correct. I mean, there is, I think there is a lot of technological change, right? Mostly, I think, seen by AI, but then we're still dealing as well with legacy systems, right? Not every company upgrades all of their technology on as they should, as they maybe should, right? Because they have your budget constraints and they need to allocate resources. So you have this changing threat environment where these AI enables, provides access to pretty sophisticated techniques to your average person, right? Yeah, you don't need to be, particularly, you don't need to be one of the world's best, malware writers anymore in order to launch a sophisticated malware attack against a company. So the availability of this advanced technology is enabling more, providing access to more people to enable attacks, which is kind of a problem, right? Because nation state actors don't just have the latest and best attack capabilities anymore, right? They're now scalable out to your average cyber criminal gangs, which changes the cost equation again on the network defender side. And then I think getting back to kind of a point I was making earlier is I remember back in the day we said, hey, segment your operational technology environments from your corporate environments, make sure they're not connected. And the business reality is that a lot of those networks need to be connected now. So you have a lot of operational technologies that are connected to core business functions through corporate networks, and I think that makes a not for a great combination, right? Where you have these old legacy systems that may not be secure, and you have these advanced capabilities that are being used to attack networks. It's not really a great equation sometimes for the network defenders.
Thank you. Everyone is saying every year that attacks are becoming more sophisticated. I remember having a slide that says attacks are becoming more sophisticated 20 years ago. Now getting the briefings from various sources, I can see that many attacks are actually very easy to create. They are devastating, but not particularly sophisticated in terms of how they are designed. So, Matt, what do you think? Are the attacks enabled by new technology becoming more sophisticated, or are they becoming more varied and easier to implement? Which is it?
Well, I think the answer is both, right? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, the attacks are becoming more sophisticated. Just take a look at the phishing attempts that you're getting now, right? The ones I'm getting, it's AI behind it. It's doing a look at my LinkedIn profile. It's creating several paragraphs that are customized just to me, right? But it's also being done in an automated fashion. I'm not the only one being targeted. It's everybody. So the attackers are using technology as really we expect them to, right? It increases their scale, but it also increases their effectiveness. The attacks themselves are getting better, right? We're seeing attacks against technology, better chained attacks that are going faster, that are going deeper, that are more difficult to detect because technology is being leveraged. It's more complex, right? But it's also becoming easier to scale So yes, this is the normal evolution of cybersecurity because you have intelligent adversaries who can use and employ disruptive technology to their advantage. And they get, again, that first mover advantage. So they're going to use that to achieve their objectives. And then the defenders typically respond, right? We tend not to respond until we feel pain. The first axiom of cybersecurity is not relevant until it fails. When you start seeing the pain, right? Let's look at the car manufacturer in the United Kingdom. Billions of dollars between them and that supply chain. It exposed the fragility of that. You're going to see a whole bunch of regulations. You're going to see a whole bunch of different controls. You're going to see many different companies across different sectors take notice and now up-level their defense because they don't want to be the next impacted organization. So yeah, we're seeing attackers advance in scale and effectiveness, in complexity, but at the same time, they're able to maintain pace with their resources to be able to achieve that. And now it'll be the defender's turn as we go in this tug of war, where we'll start using those same technologies, and we're employing AI as well, right, to counter what the attackers are doing. And that's where we find that optimal level of security that we all pursue, that balance of risk that's acceptable based on the costs and what we're willing to spend and the friction that we introduce into the environment.
Thank you, Matt. Scott, looking at the sort of corporate environment, what do you think is the balance of risk that is acceptable today? What are the new approaches that you see in the organization where you are one of the leaders in terms of acceptable risks and new defenses that need to be created?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question, right? I think everyone has a different risk tolerance, and they have a different answer to that question, right? We're seeing more and more. What I'm seeing more and more of is CISOs asking for help in how to evaluate the business risks, asking for help on how to communicate these risks to their C-suite executives, because I think there's the going in and saying, hey, we're blocking, I need a tool so I can block more attacks. I need to block, hey, thanks for this tool. Now we're blocking twice as many attacks. That's great. But that doesn't really quantify what your business risk is and what the risk is, your regulatory risk for non-compliance, right? Your legal risk. If, hey, hypothetically speaking, I'm regulatory compliant, I still get breached, what's my legal risk, right? So you have the risk to the enterprise, your enterprise business, you have your legal risk, you have your regulatory risk, and they all have the same formula, right? So, it's a really challenging environment because there's more and more regulations across more and more jurisdictions, and they're not always the same. Some of them, as we've noted earlier, some of them are duplicative. So if you move your policy in this direction, does it impact your your legal status in another, in another country or in another state? So it's a really complex regulatory environment, a really complex risk environment. And obviously it's a complex threat environment, and we're all doing it, and they're all doing it with smaller and smaller budgets, right? So there's more and more pressure on CISOs and chief security officers to do more with security budgets that are not really increasing. So it's really a challenging environment, and there's risk tolerances differ. And one of the final point on this is companies tend to look at risks differently than governments, right? Because from a company, you want to manage your enterprise risks. Countries are looking for national security risks. So a lot of companies don't necessarily look at themselves as national security risks. Or if they do, they say, hey, look, that's not my responsibility, right? My responsibility is to manage risk to my enterprise. I'm not responsible for making sure an army of APT actors don't, cause havoc in the United States, right? That's a national security risk that should be a federal government responsibility. So it's a really complicated environment out there, and finding that right balance.
Yes, and it's also good that there is more understanding, especially in the corporate world, with these topics, making it to the boards. However, this does not always generate solutions. It's mostly generates awareness. Matt, how do you think the boards should react to the new cybersecurity risks that appear to affect all industries today?
Well, I think the good news is the boards are feeling the pressure. Part of that is from regulation, part of that is from the business partners, part of it is from their customers and the consumers. So boards are starting to become more savvy. Cyber is no longer some risk that's buried down in an audit committee. It's actually making it to the table and having discussions, which is great. It needs to. Cyber is a major business risk that should be incorporated into that larger scope of risks that boards manage. However, this is driving CISOs to have to come and communicate and facilitate those discussions. For most CISOs, they are not board ready. They are not comfortable with the business discussions that the board normally has as part of their transactions and communications. So we still have a gap there. And I think that gap will close. It has to close because there need to be enterprise level decisions around cyber for the individual organizations. And then, as Scott mentioned, those then feed into a more strategic discussion at a national level. And as Iva has talked about, right, that extends across borders into nations and communities and a global scape. So this is building, and it's a good thing. Boards need not be afraid of having those discussions. I work with a lot of boards. Some of them are a little apprehensive. I'm not, technology oriented. I don't understand. I'm getting presented with alert graphs. This is not business. And at the same time, the CISOs are like, I'm a technologist at heart, so I'm going to give 56 slides talking about crossover false positive rates. And so they're missing the necessary communication. But that has to change. There has to be a transformation, and the boards need to embrace those right discussions to manage the overall risk, not just cyber, but also the normal business risk, but incorporate that in for their success.
Thank you. And it's a very good comment that the defense space, the cybersecurity defense space is somewhat fragmented, no matter what view you take, be it a corporation from the board down, be it a supply chain. So let's now discuss the influence of geopolitical situation, different regulations worldwide, supply chain issues on the cybersecurity situation in large. Iva mentioned the issue with regard to the supply chain problems for the UK automotive industry. That's a good example because in Europe there is a lot of automotive industry. The supply chain is still organized in the usual old way as hub and spokes. So when one spoke fails, everyone is affected, but the geopolitical situation sometimes makes it impossible to control all the spokes or make a transition to different spokes quickly. How can the regulatory reactions as well as technology reactions deal with this variability in geopolitical situations and their impact on traditional supply chains in industries that are crucial for Europe? What do you think, Iva?
Yes, indeed, Claire. So I very much enjoyed the discussion, and I wanted to also to jump on what is happening with the attacks. Are they really more sophisticated or not? But I can really not use sophisticated as a term, but maybe I can say they're more accessible, the attacks, more personalized, so it's difficult to resist, but also more public. I don't know if you have noticed, but the recent news, something happens in the world, is the first sentence, second sentence, it was not due to cyber attack. So everyone is kind of expecting and seeing these cyber attacks everywhere. And how can we count the geopolitical, or in general, the changes in our environment? So what we have in Europe, and now it's not news to many CISOs, more mature CISOs that would consider the situation, the environment around them in their own risk analysis. So now this is happening in the world. We could expect this slowdown or increase in our own risk posture. But what Europe is doing is to have regular risk assessments at national and then European level, aggregated, and push this back to the industry. Say, look, including in the CRA, you have a requirement to consider and the NIS too as well, to consider the systematic risk, basically, assessment within your own risk assessment. So you cannot stay isolated from the world, even if you, to some extent, are trying still to cope with your own internal organization. You are also now invited, at least you have information of what is the risk in Europe that you should consider in your own risk assessment considerations. So this is one to kind of aggregate, right? Small indicators within country and then within Europe, and then push back to industry, so everyone reflects in their risk assessment. Something maybe very interesting is happening also, is very technical, but is the software bill of materials, right? It's a new term that we are now learning how to implement. There are guidances, of course, from NIST that we get inspired, and the NISA, European Agency for Cybersecurity, is working now, collecting feedback. So if you are experts in the field, please send your feedback of how this is done today in the industry. But this is, again, the objective to get a hold on the supply chain risk in more technology terms. So what is actually within your product, within your processes, that is impacting your security, and then consider their vulnerabilities and their risks within your own vulnerability risk assessment. So really extending this supply chain security to more technical, to more machine readable, if you wish, to more, let's say, tangible considerations of the supply chain. So this, I think it's all I don't know if we're getting more sophisticated, but for sure there are a lot of more elements for CISOs, for security leaders, or business leaders overall to consider, and it is ever more important to automate the easy parts. Otherwise, we get lost completely in following up on all the possible trends, vulnerabilities, technicalities, and people. So this is very important message to use. Not AI necessarily, but traditional, even algorithmic or logical or machine forms of automating the processes, so that we can get a hold on it, of all the data that is around us. So indeed, I think this is how we do more of the regular assessment and aggregation, so that everyone is on the same. And something I also forgot to mention is that we're used to think of cyber risk as my risk for me, right? I take the information of outside world, I break it down for me. And now with regulation like the CRA, we have to also be transparent about, but even think about the risk for the user. So risk assessment is no longer what would happen to me, but what might happen to my user in their context and in their awareness level with a normal operating environment, of course, for software or hardware that we place on the market. And thinking about it could really incentivize a lot more security embedded within products, but also being transparent about it might create these dynamics of either users really going for more secure product because they see there are less risks, or hopefully also educating the users so that they use technology in more risk mitigated manner. They take the measures to reduce the risk.
Yeah, educating the users of all kind is certainly very important, and the dynamics of the application of risk concerns has changed over the years. Let's talk about how we can anticipate potential risks. Thinking back about the advent of artificial intelligence and its impact on cybersecurity, I remember mostly how we talked about attacks that are specific to artificial intelligence environments, such as adversarial attacks, rather than anticipating how artificial intelligence can be used to enable attacks and to protect from attacks to a significant degree. Now we are in the process of transition to quantum safe cryptography. Have we anticipated the risks, cybersecurity risks, obviously, for this discussion of this transition? And what do we need to do to fully anticipate them? Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, the post-quantum, right? So I think there's a couple aspects of this is, one is, we don't really know what the timeline is, right? We don't know how much roadmap is that we have to prepare for this. So there's a lot of uncertainty from companies on with all of the other resource allocation issues that they have. This is a risk, but where does it fall on the priority matrix? I think is a lot of companies are having that discussion, right? And if it's from a resource allocation perspective, for a lot of times, even if the security professionals understand the risks, they need to communicate it effectively up to the people with the budgets to get the budget for preparing for it. And unfortunately, a lot of times the people who prepare the budgets, they focus on what's present and what's prevalent in the news today. So I think that there's a lot of security experts who are beginning to understand the risk. And one of the biggest risks actually is that there are nation states who are gobbling up as much data as they can get. And then when, for a future date, they can unencrypt it all. And then, I'm not sure how many companies are prepared for that. And I don't know, that's a whole nother, beyond the technology discussion, right? There's that business discussion where now all of your intellectual property that you thought were safely encrypted, even, is now not, right? So there's a lot of security risks associated with post-quantum, and I'm not, that's not my core area of expertise. You can't be, but that is, talk with member companies. Those are some member companies in some of the ISACs that I manage, and some of the professionals who are working, doing some of the research on this. It's a pretty, it really is an important topic, but it doesn't necessarily get the attention that people want it to have, because there's a uncertain timeline about it. It's something for the future, and I have more pressing matters that I need to address today.
Thank you. We hear from everyone something that you mentioned, that the resource allocation is not optimal for PQC, for the PQC transition. They are in competition with artificial intelligence projects, not only with regard to cybersecurity, but just artificial intelligence deployment. And not enough effort is made in anticipating the risks. What do you think about this, Iva? What needs to be done to anticipate the risks better in light of what you said earlier?
I think it is very difficult to anticipate risks in the current environment. very fast evolution, because as Scott said, we tend to look at the past and see what happened and adapt to it. So the past becomes less and less relevant, and the trends are becoming much shorter and shorter cycles. So we have to learn to be very much more predictive than we used to be in the past. In the past, we were more analytical. We see what happens in the past, we take a graph and we assume it's going to continue. So we have to change a little bit also the mindset, but also potentially not focus so much of knowing it, because we cannot know it. You know, the word is kind of living. There are a lot of factors, but prepare for the different scenarios. What if this and this and this? You would be somewhere in this, you know, fragmented options, but what would be the scenarios? What would be the measures? What would be the resilience, you know, capabilities that you need to resist in all possible scenarios? So you cannot choose a winner. This is my key risk. I prepare and I put all my efforts there, because you might quickly just be broken, right? Spread your eggs a little bit if you wish, so that you make sure that you cover all the possible scenarios. So in your question, how can we predict the risk? Probably just prepare a lot of the visible things, keep an eye on what's happening, adapt your strategies, but maybe something we don't emphasize enough is that at the end, all this technology changes a lot of the surface. It changes the glazing, but the core is always the same. It's the processes, it's the checks and balances, it's the people. So again, don't get too lost on the glazing, and also get your basics right, and then you would see it's quite resistant in any possible risk scenario.
Thank you, Eva. So we need to prepare for different risk scenarios, and that's where artificial intelligence can actually help. Using PQC as an example, what are the risks we need to anticipate some of them to prepare for this transition? Matt, what do you think?
Well, when it comes to quantum and PQC, right, there actually is a lot of work in that space. We've got 4 algorithms that have been identified for NIST for Western countries, right? You've got China doing their own stuff. They use different types of algorithms. But so we've got some good research and understanding. We've got many large companies, not medium or small, but large companies, typically service companies, cloud, for example, that already have teams kind of spun up. Amazon, for as an example, has already switched and has a whole program for some of their services to move away from vulnerable algorithms to more resistant ones. But again, it isn't widespread. And, you know, as Scott said, we don't know when that cliff is coming, but the moment a number of factors that come together, right, specifically around hardware computing and efficiencies to be able to run things like Shor's algorithm and whatnot, to be able to undermine asymmetric encryption, once that happens, everybody's going to be in panic, because things like our banking transactions, our secure web, portals, things like that become insecure. So for some companies, they're seeing, at least internally, they're starting to do inventories to say, okay, what encryption are we using? Where are we using it? How dependent are we? But again, it takes a back seat to the things that are already on fire. So there has to be a balance there. And normally you have to have some type of leadership to say, yes, we're going to work on what's on fire and put the current fires out with cybersecurity and privacy and regulation and all that. But we do also need to allocate some to be more predictive, to look ahead. And quantum resistance is one of those things. That we do need to keep on the radar. We do need to push forward, because we don't want to be tremendously victimized all at once when that cliff is reached. So there has to be good leadership and be able to communicate that and then allocate those resources appropriately in balance of, again, what's on fire and what we should be maneuvering towards, so that we don't end up falling off that cliff. Quantum is just one of those things. And the current things on fire we're seeing, AI is a good example of that rapid pace and exposures that we're seeing across the board. So it's a matter of balance. It's a matter of leadership.
Thank you, Matt. And talking about what's on fire, we are close to the end of our discussion. Let's briefly share our outlook for 2026. Are you positive? Are you negative with regard to cybersecurity development? And what do you think will be the most important issue next year? We'll go in the reverse alphabetical order. And very brief answers, please. Iva?
I tend to be a positive thinker, so I would say I'm positive because at least if we understand now that we have to do something, there are a lot of burning fires, and that we have also money associated with it. I see already some movements of allocating the necessary resources to get it right. So I would say I'm on the positive side. That doesn't mean I'll be right and everything would be perfectly pink, but it means we would evolve towards better security, maybe the hard way.
Thank you very much, Iva, and I am glad you closed on a positive note. Matt, what are your views? Positive,
So I do
negative, and
cybersecurity
what's
predictions
important?
every year. I'm actually in the throes of generating my 2026 ones, and I've been doing this for almost 15 years. So when I look towards, and again, I'm in the middle of that risk assessment and the predictions. When I look towards 2026, I want to be positive. What I am positive about is there will be ambiguity and chaos, that the attackers will maintain the initiative and the defenders will work very quickly to try and catch up, right, to minimize that window of exposure and impact. I am positive around the fact that we have a higher level of visibility with the boards, with entire sectors in industry, and with the regulators, the governments. They realize how important this is and are going through their learning cycle to be able to adapt faster in regards to expectations and regulations. So that's a huge benefit as well. But that's a learning curve. And we know how that goes. It's not a straight line, it's ups and downs. So I'm positive that there will be chaos and uncertainty, which is the nature of our industry in dealing with intelligent adversaries who may be smarter than us, have greater resources than us, and have more opportunities for their benefit at our expense.
So you are positive that there will be significant uncertainty and difficult times, but we have more tools to address them. Very good answer. Well, Scott, you get to have the final word of this panel. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. So I think all of the advantages remained with the attackers, right? It's more costly to defend than it is to attack, right? We're not able to impose pain on the adversaries. A lot of these attacks are going to continue until the juice isn't worth the squeeze for them, right? Until the risk isn't, until the reward isn't worth the risk, right? When you make the risk of doing this and the greater than the reward of getting away with it, right? So right now, all of the advantages are on the sides of the attackers. There's a great reward and low risk, and there's a low cost and high impact. So until we begin to change that equation a little bit, I think we're going to continue to see a large level of pain, and the advantages are certainly on the attacker side.
Thank you, Scott. So considering two sort of positive and one somewhat negative view on 2026, we closed on a neutral note. There are significant issues that we need to address, both in technology, in process, in regulatory actions. It will be difficult, but we have made progress with regard to defenders However, it is also true that the attackers have made significant progress, and they are adopting new technologies quicker than the defenders do. So it continues to be a difficult situation that we will need to address as it develops with new tools that we develop to make it easier. Iva, Matt, Scott, thank you very much for joining this panel, for sharing your insights. I learned a lot from you, and so did the audience. With that, and with even more thanks to you, I close this panel and give it to our host, David Goodman, for the final word.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Eva, Scott, and Matthew, for a really great session. For what it's worth, I'm going to go with positive, with the caveat that it's going to be ambiguous and chaotic. I really love that. Like nothing has changed. So thank you again very much. The recording will be available shortly, as will the summary report, which you're welcome to disseminate as widely as possible. We will not have any webinars next week, for which we will give thanks, particularly if you're American. And we hope to be back in 2 weeks' time, at the beginning of December. So thank you
for
very much.
hosting us, David, and thanks everyone again.